This story is from April 10th, 1912. The RMS Titanic was the biggest and most luxurious ship in the world at that time. It started its first journey, going from Southampton, England to New York, USA. There were many types of people on the ship: rich businessmen, famous actors, and also poor people who were going to America to find a better life. The captain of the ship was Edward John Smith, who was 62 years old and very experienced. People, the media, and the passengers were all very excited about this ship. It was not just the biggest ship. It was also about 269 meters long and 53 meters tall. But it was also full of luxury. In those days, the ship cost $5 million to build. Today, that would be around $400 million. Inside, the Titanic was more beautiful than a five-star hotel. It had colored glass, fancy wood walls, two big staircases, a heated swimming pool, a Turkish bath, an electric bath, a gym, a squash court for restaurants, two barbershops, and a library. It was also built with advanced safety features. Because of this, people believed that the Titanic could never sink. They called it an unsinkable ship. The company that made the ship was called White Star Line. The vice president of that company even said in public, "This ship cannot sink." But just 2 days after the journey started, on April 12th, 1912, Titanic started getting ice warnings. The Atlantic Ocean, where the Titanic was sailing to reach America, had a lot of ice. There were huge blocks of ice called icebergs, which were dangerous for ships. These kinds of warnings were normal. Ships in the ocean would often use radios to tell other nearby ships about ice in the area, so they could be careful. After getting the first warnings, Titanic changed its path twice to stay safe, but it did not slow down. It kept going fast at a speed of 5 knots, which is about 40 kilometers per hour. On April 14th, 1912, Titanic got 7 more warnings about ice. But Captain Smith and his crew ignored them. They still did not slow the ship down. As the day ended, the sunset came and the temperature got colder. One important thing about the night of April 14th was that there was no moon. So there was no moonlight, and it was very dark, which made it hard to see. The Titanic had a crow's nest, a small high platform used to look ahead on the ship's path. A person would sit there to watch for danger, like other ships or icebergs. The person sitting there had to deal with strong cold winds, especially at night. The cold air made their eyes water, which made it harder to see clearly. At 11:39 p.m., a man named Frederick Fleet was in the crow's nest. Suddenly, he saw a huge iceberg right in front of the ship. He rang the warning bell 3 times quickly to alert the crew below. Then he called the officers on the ship's bridge using a phone. He shouted that there was an iceberg ahead, and the ship needed to turn immediately. The first officer, William Murdoch, heard the warning and quickly gave a signal to the engine room to take action. The officer gave the order to turn the ship to the left, but sadly it was too late. Just 1 minute later, at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic hit the iceberg. The Titanic was a symbol of rich and fancy life. It had left from Southampton, England. There were many rich and famous people on board. The music was playing, people were dancing, enjoying their time. But at 11:40, everything changed. The iceberg hit the right side of the ship. The ship shook suddenly and lifted up a little. This iceberg was huge, about 200 feet wide and 400 feet long, almost the size of a football field. It was also very tall, almost as high as the ship's crow's nest. Scientists believe the iceberg weighed around 1.5 million tons, extremely heavy. The front right part of the Titanic, called the bow, hit the iceberg. Let's understand some ship parts. The bow is the front of the ship. The stern is the back part. The keel is the part under the ship, running along the bottom. The Titanic rubbed against the iceberg for about 10 seconds. This caused a huge dent and small holes in the side of the ship. You might ask, how can ice tear metal? Well, regular ice from your fridge can't break metal. But this iceberg was as heavy as a mountain. It's like how a tree can't cut metal, but your metal car can crash into a tree and still get badly damaged. In the same way, the massive and heavy iceberg damaged Titanic badly. Just a few seconds after the crash, Captain Smith and the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, came to see how bad the damage really was. When Captain Smith and designer Thomas Andrews saw the damage, they realized something shocking. The Titanic was going to sink. They couldn't believe it. They had always thought the Titanic was unsinkable. At the start of this story, we said that the Titanic had great safety features. There were two main features that made people believe it couldn't sink. Double bottom hull. The main part of the ship is called the hull. Titanic had 2 layers at the bottom. If the bottom layer was damaged, the second one could still protect the ship. 16 watertight compartments. The ship was divided into 16 sections. Even if 4 sections filled with water, the ship could still float. But there was a big problem. The iceberg hit the side of the ship, not the bottom. The sides had only 1 layer, so the double hull didn't help. Also, the crash was so strong that it broke 6 out of the 16 compartments. Water started flooding all 6. The ship could only handle 4 compartments flooding. With 6 full of water, the Titanic was sure to sink. The unsinkable ship would now sink. 20 minutes after the crash, at 12 a.m., Captain Smith told his crew to send an emergency message, called a distress call, on the radio. They hoped that nearby ships would hear it and come to help. A man named Jack Phillips, the ship's senior radio operator, became a hero that night. He started sending SOS messages again and again. At first, no one replied. He kept sending more and more signals, hoping some ship would hear them. Finally, at 12:20 a.m., a ship named RMS Carpathia heard the message. Its radio operator spoke to the Titanic's team, and the Carpathia started coming to help. But there was another problem. Even though it was close, the Carpathia was still 107 kilometers away. Even at top speed, it would take 5 hours to reach the Titanic. The question now was, could the Titanic stay afloat for 5 hours? While waiting, the crew lit flares and fireworks in the sky, hoping other ships nearby might see them and come. But sadly, no other ships responded. Only the Carpathia was coming. In the meantime, Captain Smith ordered the crew to start evacuating passengers using the ship's lifeboats. As per the rules, women and children were to be sent first into the lifeboats. At first, the passengers were not very scared. Most of them believed that the Titanic could not sink. After all, the company had advertised it many times as unsinkable. So even after hitting the iceberg, people thought, yes, we hit something, but the ship won't sink. Because of this, the first lifeboat that was lowered could hold 65 people, but only 28 people got in. More than half the seats were empty when the boat went down. But as time passed, more and more compartments filled with water. The ship started to tilt forward. Now, people began to understand the truth. The Titanic could really sink. When this became clear, people panicked and started running in fear. By 1 a.m., the front of the ship, the bow, had gone underwater because so much water had filled the compartments. Because the front was going down, the back part of the ship rose up. The propellers at the back were now out of the water. As the ship tilted more and more, there was chaos everywhere. People fought each other to get into the lifeboats. But here's the problem. There were only 20 lifeboats on the ship. They could carry about 1,200 people. But the ship had 2,200 people on board. At 2:05 a.m., the last lifeboat was lowered into the water. About 1,500 people were still on the ship. In the panic, some people tried to force their way into the boats, but others stayed back, knowing there was no escape. The end was chaotic. Everyone was crying, praying, trying to get into the last few boats. It was really, really sad. According to people who survived, the Titanic broke into 2 pieces at around 2:20 a.m. After breaking in 2, the Titanic slowly sank underwater. It took less than 3 hours for the unsinkable ship to fully sink. Out of the 1,500 people who were still on the ship, many drowned when the ship sank. Some knew how to swim, but they still died in the cold water. The water was freezing, about -2 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, If someone falls into the ocean, they will die in just a few minutes because of hypothermia, extreme body cold. It is said that Captain Edward Smith of the Titanic stayed at the steering wheel until the very end and died with the ship. Some people believe he killed himself just before the ship sank. The rescue ship, RMS Carpathia, finally reached the area around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. But it was 1 hour too late. The Titanic had already sunk. After the disaster, many questions were asked. Many controversies, big disagreements started. Investigations were done. Some shocking truths were found. One such truth: there was another ship just 37 kilometers away from the Titanic that night. That ship could have saved many people on time. This ship was called the SS Californian. Just 1 hour before the Titanic hit the iceberg, the SS Californian sent a warning. Be careful. There are many icebergs here. But at 11:15 p.m., the radio operator on that ship turned off the radio. The Californian had stopped sailing for the night because of the ice. Because their radio was off, they didn't get Titanic's distress signal. They didn't know Titanic was in trouble. The Californian was so close to the Titanic that people on Titanic could see it in the distance. When lifeboats were being lowered, one officer even said, "Look, there's a ship nearby. It will come to save us. Don't worry." But the Californian never came, even though flares and rockets were fired into the sky to call for help. The crew on the Californian ship did see the rockets being fired from Titanic. They even told their captain, Stanley Lord. But he said, "It's not an emergency. The rich people on Titanic must be having a party." If Captain Lord had taken the rockets seriously, many people on the Titanic could have been saved. The next morning, when they turned the radio back on, they heard Titanic's SOS messages. They quickly went to help, but by the time they reached, it was too late. All they saw were dead bodies in the water. 2 investigations were done after this. Both said that Captain Lord of the Californian was to blame. But many people were responsible, not just one man. One big mistake: there weren't enough lifeboats on the Titanic. The company believed the ship was unsinkable, so they didn't think many lifeboats were needed. Another mistake: Captain Smith never did a safety drill. They were supposed to do one on the day the ship hit the iceberg, but he canceled it, thinking it wasn't important. Another problem was with Robert Hickens, the man steering the ship. When the officer told him to turn the ship left, he got confused and turned it right instead, which made the ship go towards the iceberg. By the time he understood his mistake, it was too late. The British inquiry found that Titanic had received many iceberg warnings, but still the ship was moving at full speed. Why didn't the captain slow down? One theory says that Joseph Bruce Ismay, the boss of the company that built Titanic, White Star Line, pressured Captain Smith to keep going fast. He wanted the Titanic to finish its first journey in 6 days, so they could break a record and prove that Titanic was not only the biggest and most expensive, but also the fastest ship. On April 14th, at 2 p.m., Captain Smith saw an ice warning and showed it to Joseph. Captain Smith said we should slow down, but Joseph put the warning paper in his pocket. He didn't want others to see it and didn't want the ship to go slower. After this disaster, the whole shipping industry changed. In 1914, an international ice patrol was started. This group watches for icebergs and warns ships. A treaty called SALAS, Safety of Life at Sea, was signed. New rules were made, including every ship must have enough lifeboats for all passengers. It took more than 70 years to find the Titanic's wreck. In September 1985, an American explorer, Robert Ballard, and a French scientist found the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean. It was found 3,800 meters, 8 kilometri, underwater. The ship was in 2 big pieces, 600 meters apart. Today, the Titanic is slowly falling apart under the sea. The metal is being eaten by bacteria and other sea life. Experts think the wreck will be gone by 2030. Even after 110 years, people are still interested in Titanic. In 2012, an Australian billionaire, Clive Palmer, said he wanted to build Titanic 2, an exact copy of the original. He wanted it to sail on the same route, as the first Titanic. The plan was to finish by 2016, but it still wasn't finished in 2022. Some say the project failed because the new ship wouldn't have TV or Wi-Fi, and people wouldn't want to travel like that. So maybe Titanic 2 sank before it ever sailed. If you like this video, watch the next one.